have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Valuations Podcast, brought to you by Truelytics, the premier business intelligence platform for the wealth management industry. My name is Mike Langford, and I will be your host. And this is episode 9, and it's a very special one because it's the first time that I am joined by 2 guests on the podcast at the same time. So I'm really excited. First of all, Carla McCabe is joining me again, and you may remember Carla from an earlier episode. Carla is the director of practice management at Truelytics. So if you have either as an individual advisor or your firm has onboarded with Truelytics, you have certainly likely talked to Carla live on the phone or via email. And if you've ever had a succession planning challenge and you needed some guidance, Carla was almost certainly there working with you and your team as well. So I'm really, really excited to have Carla back. And Carla and I are joined today by Grant Hicks. Grant Hicks is the president and founder of Advisor Practice Management. And you can kind of guess, I think maybe you can guess, what Grant and his team do. Yeah, exactly. Practice management. They spend a lot of time, as you'll hear Grant say, working with individual advisors and large broker-dealers and RIAs on how to work on their business to get more efficient, particularly because one of the things that he and his team identified many, many years ago is that time constraints, capacity as he calls it, is very often one of the biggest limiters for advisors and for wealth management businesses to struggle to grow to the next level, right? Because you run up against it. You have too many clients. There's not enough hours in the day. You can't figure out how you're going to get more business. And it also kind of messes with your brain because you can't figure out how are we going to innovate and get better in the coming year or innovate to respond to competitive threats we're seeing in our space. Whatever that is for you and your business, you're really going to want to pay attention to this episode because Grant, frankly, he brought it. He brought his A game on this podcast. So it was really great to get to meet Grant and spend some time with him here. And of course, Carla always brings her magic. I mean, who doesn't love Carla? I love talking to Carla, so she can be on the show anytime she wants. So I think you're really going to enjoy this one. So why don't you, as usual, sit back, grab a beverage, get your earbuds in, and we're going to have a good time. But before I kick it off, remember, like, subscribe, share this with your friends and colleagues because we want them to join us on the Valuations Podcast. And as always, if you have questions or you have topics or people you'd like to see us have on the show, shoot me an email, valuations@truelytics.com. Hit us up on the socials. We're Truelytics pretty much everywhere on all the social networks, or swing on by to the Truelytics website, truelytics.com, and put a contact us stuff in there and send it on over to us, and we'll make sure we get you on the show or your topic on the show. Okay? Are you ready? Let's do it. Here's Grant and Carla. All right. So, hey, Grant, welcome to the show. I'm really happy to have you on the Valuations Podcast. Excuse me. And Carla, great to have you back as well. Tag teaming once again for another recorded episode of the show. This episode is going to be pretty interesting. And I think the thing that's most exciting to me is that we're having it here at the beginning of the new year, 2019, because I think it's inevitable. It's in all of us as on our personal lives and in our business lives that at the beginning of a new year, you start to think, okay, what do I want to accomplish in the year to come and in the future? And what's working in my business? What's not working in my business? And I think it's really, really smart to have 2 practice management professionals here offering their insights. Obviously, Grant, you're out in the world consulting and speaking and leading from the outside and evangelizing a lot of concepts. And I'll ask you for an intro here in a second. And Carla, of course, inside here at Truelytics, almost all of our clients at some point in time come in contact with you because they need your help. You're the most adept in the organization at helping people on board with the system and giving them guidance to succeed. But I thought before we kind of dig into the meat of our conversation, maybe we can get an intro of you, Grant. I'll do a little bit of one in the intro, of course, for the podcast. But it's always kind of fun to kick off and get a bit of an IMDb version of the journey that somebody's taken to get to where they are today. You and I were chatting before I clicked the record button, and you you have a really exciting career, and you've walked a mile in many of the shoes of the advisors and other executives that may be listening in on this podcast. So why don't you give us kind of a quick overview of your background and what brought you to advisor practice management?
Yeah, sure. So 2019 is exciting for me because it's my 30th year in the industry. And I've had 20 years as a financial advisor. I built up a practice of 120 million of clients' assets. I had a team of 6 and sold that. And I also built up a mutual fund dealership and was a partner of that and sold that. So I've run and I've done a lot of the roles that financial advisors and financial executives have done in the past. And I've also got 10 years of consulting. I was the national director of practice management for Manulife in Canada. So I traveled across the whole country seeing what different advisors and practices do and how they're successful. And now which led me to the consulting side, which is my own firm, which is Advisor Practice Management. And along the way, I've written 5 books. One of the books I've written that people know me for is Guerrilla Marketing for Financial Advisors. That series, the Guerrilla Marketing series, has sold over 21 million copies worldwide and is one of the most successful marketing series of all time. So a lot of people know me from that book that I've written. And a lot of the speaking that I've done. And that also led me to the practice management side of things, because working with advisors and digging into practices, digging into teams, all those practice management issues come out. And that's what I love to work with, is helping people tackle their blind spots and opportunities to get their practice to where they really want it to have it happen. So that's it in a nutshell.
It's fantastic. And of course, Carla, it's wonderful to have you on the show again. How are things on your neck of the woods?
Great to be back, Mike. Thank you. Things are good. Also excited about 2019 and what the industry might hold for all of us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I thought the first topic, and this one's set for you guys, I would imagine both of you would kind of roll your eyes at like, is this really a question? But, the first question I kind of have is, why should advisors and broker dealers take practice management seriously? And it sounds kind of sacrilege to your ears, I'm sure. But one of the things I've observed over the years is that many advisors tend to see practice management initiatives in the same way that I've noticed that high school kids view like the adult coming to the auditorium and giving them a speech about, here's what it takes to be successful in life. You just look around and every kid's rolling their eyes and going, okay, yep. What time's lunch? When do I get out of here? Type of attitude. But what do you, first of all, that question of how do you get people to take it seriously, but also what do you usually do to break through to an executive at a firm or an individual advisor to get them to say, hey, get them to appreciate this is something you need to focus on. Like you need to focus on good practice management if you want to grow and succeed in this business. Grant, what are some of the things that you typically do to break through?
Well, the first thing we always kind of joke about the psychology of it, but I use this analogy. It's like a person walking towards a mirror saying, why doesn't that person get out of my way? Right? And so we all get in our own way, and we all realize that, and it's just a human nature thing. So when we realize that we are in our own way, we need to have someone help us to get out of our own way. And so we know that the average advisor 72% of advisors don't have a clear written business plan. They don't even have clarity on what their future looks like. They're planning other people's clarities, but their own business they're not really planning for. But the 25% that do have a plan, they earn 41% more than the advisors that don't. So at the very least, we need to have a plan. We know that. And so as you start to build out this plan, different blind spots and opportunities come out of those plans. But we know that only 3% of advisors truly put the key processes into actually achieving what they really want to do. And those are the elite advisors in the industry. And they earn 246% more than the advisors that don't. So I don't care if you have a plan, because we know that 3/4 of the advisors don't have a plan, right? And those are the ones that, are in their own way and they can't get out of their own way. But the ones that do get out of their own way, they do get some practice management help. They're earning 41% more than the advisors that aren't, just simply by putting some of those processes into place. And the final piece is the implementation schedule. There's no shortage of great ideas in this industry. There's no shortage of practice management strategies and ideas. They're all fantastic. It's implementing it that's the key difference. And so what I highly encourage the people that are listening on this call is just do one thing. Please just do one thing. Is what I want you to do is I want you to plan 2 to 4 hours per week. 40 weeks a year. You put 80 hours into building the processes to run your practice. I swear to you, those 80 hours are worth $1,000 an hour. Sound fair? So that's what I want people to do to listen on this call is at the very least plan and put the time to work on your business, not in the business. And that's going to make the difference each and every week. You know, when do you work on your business? We don't have time to work on business. We don't even have time for time management, right? So that's the biggest thing that I help advisors do, because that was the biggest difference that I ever made, is working on your business and putting those processes in. So Carla, over to you.
Yeah, Grant, I could not agree more. It's funny because I always say, when you first start your business, you spend all of your time working on the business because you don't necessarily have the clients yet. But when you fast forward a few years, you forget to work on the business because you're so entrenched in working in the business. So it's very important to, for folks to kind of have that realization and, like you said, commit that time to taking a step back and working on some of the issues you mentioned.
That's really interesting. I did a video earlier this week and I posted it over on LinkedIn about the importance of reps. And it sounds like that's something you really believe in, Grant, is that, look, it's not about taking this gigantic chunk of time and, I've got to go away for an entire week and focus on my planning. It seems that you favor like the consistent amount of planning and touching and working on the business over the course of the year. That's kind of a habit that can help people transform their business and create better practice management. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the three keys are process, process, process. Or as people jokingly say, because I'm Canadian, process, process, process.
And it is process.
I get that all the time. So,
are you a coupon guy or a coupon guy? Which one are you?
I'm a Canadian guy.
Okay, go ahead. So your process. Why do you say that so much? I'm sorry. I apologize.
So we go to these conferences and we meet these successful advisors and we want to pick their brain. And every single time we pick their brain, they've got a process for how they run their business on growing their clients. They got a process for how they're servicing their clients. They got a process. So those people have more processes than the average advisor. And it took time to build that into their business. And so if you take that each and every week and say, okay, I need to spend time on ideal client acquisition and build a process. I need to spend time on servicing our clients better and build that as a process. I need to spend time on technology, whatever that process is, we have to budget the time to put that into place. And as we start to spend those 2 to 4 hours a week and building that process, now you've got the things that are going to help build you the scale, and you keep building and building more and more process. So tell me the top advisors that you met and tell me how many processes that they've put into their practice versus the average advisor. And that's the key difference right there. And that's what we want to help you build is some of those, what are the key processes that you really want to put into your business to make it run better? That's it.
Carla, building on that, you and I had discussed this, and I believe Jeff Miller and I talked about this a little bit more as well. But in Truelytics, one of the things you are looking at is the investment process, to single out one process. That what does the investment process look like at a firm in a wealth management business? Because there is a big difference in terms of the valuation and potentially the sale price at some point down the road in a business that has a certain type of investment process in place versus one that might have a custom, every client's a special snowflake. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, and it really ties back to any type of process, is just being very clear on what it is, what you're offering, how you're going to do things. Like you had said, the snowflake approach, if we're talking about the investment process of one of those, how does that affect capacity? How does it affect scale? And Grant was talking about earlier, we were talking offline about that being one of the big things that advisors struggle with.
Right. Yeah. And I think about it was a big aha moment for me when we discussed it earlier, because if I'm thinking of acquiring your business, or as you say, scaling the business as well, even before the sale of the business, I have to know that this is a repeatable process, that every client it comes in, I know that I take that client, I've acquired them, I onboard them, and then I service them, and it's a repeatable process. So I think you guys are spot on with that.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a quick little story. So, every single client wants to do a fantastic job of servicing their best clients. Yet, every single year I asked advisors, what did you do last year in 2018 to add more value to your best clients? And what are you going to do in 2019 to add more value to your best clients? We're not adding more cost, we're adding more value. Hence, the advisors that I've worked with have added one thing of major value each and every year. Hence, 10 years later, they've added 10 things of value to their best clients. And the competition can't figure out how they're going to catch up, right? And so my question for the listeners is, what is the dramatic thing of value that you want to deliver to your best clients this year? And that's a process right there.
And I love that
that's really
approach.
That's a really smart approach. Yeah.
It's
Go ahead,
it's
Carla.
baby steps. You're getting to where you want to eventually be, but you're breaking it down into more manageable chunks, if you will.
Yeah. So Carla, what's one thing of value that the advisors can use for Truelytics to add to their best clients this year?
Oh goodness, I have so many. Like, where do I start? I think, well, the one that I'm most passionate about, which I've spoke about before, is really centered around succession. So that's great that you're doing what's best for your client today. Let's think beyond you, and let's make sure that there's a plan in place to continue that same level of service should something happen to that owner.
Smart. And what's interesting about that, I have a client that he actually uses the fact that he has succession plans in place as a value prop for winning new clients, right? That he tells a client that when you're working with me, you're not just working with me as an individual advisor, you have the firm behind me, and there's a plan in place that should I get hit by a bus, you are taken care of. There's never going to be any type of interruption in service to you. And he's actually used that succession planning as a sales tool, frankly, to close clients.
Yeah. To give you an example, Mike, people used to come into my office. They had a tremendous amount of wealth, and they'd say, Grant, what happens to you? And I would pull out the letter. And what the letter is, basically they would read it and say, now that you're reading this, Grant Hicks is no longer here. His team is going to put in place together a plan to help you deliver the same level of service that you expect, and here's what we're going to do. Boom, 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 boom. And the clients read that letter and go, wow, thank you. You've really thought this through, put the process into place, and taken care of me. I really appreciate that. I didn't even say one word. I just handed them the letter.
It's really smart.
Yeah.
It's really smart.
Yeah. So write the letter.
That's great. That's great. So switching gears a little bit, because this is actually an area of fascination to me, because I've spent a lot of time with large financial organizations, whether they be independent broker-dealers, wirehouses, you name it. And the process, if you will, right, in-house for those organizations for rolling out who gets access to the new technology, the new services, whatever that is always a bit of a mystery, right? I find it a bit perplexing. Like, how do a broker-dealer grant access to the new practice management initiatives, or somebody like yourself, Grant, who comes in from the outside and is going to get access to practice management? Or on the Truelytics side, if a large broker-dealer decides they're going to roll with Truelytics and roll it out to all of their advisors, very often they do it in chunks, right? So what's your thought process in terms of rolling out better practice management? Should it go to the most at-risk advisors in a population at first, or should it go to the top producers? Or how do you decide if you went into, let's say, a broker-dealer and they had 1,000 advisors spread out all over the country? How do you decide this is who we help first, right? It's kind of a triage, because obviously you're one person with your team behind you, and the same thing here at Truelytics. But what should be the mindset that we go at in terms of helping people?
Carla, I'm going to grab this, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So what I would, I'll tell you a quick little story. So, when I go to conferences and speak, everyone says, hey, I'd like you to meet my, our top producers. And I go, great. How do you become a top producer? And they're like, what? This guy's just, be in the business. He doesn't know how do you become a top producer. But what I actually ultimately am asking them is, how do you become a top producer in terms of value delivered to your best clients? So what I would think about doing is giving the process to the advisors that run the best practice. The best practice is not necessarily, it sometimes is, the top practices. But the best run practices, have all pieces and components. They've got the succession piece. They've got the valuation piece. They've got their, capacity piece. They've got a very well-run practice, and they don't have usually many issues. So what I would consider doing is running the practice of the year contest. Right? And let's get all the information of who runs the best practice of the year, put it into Truelytics, and then you can, have, a measurement of who's got the best practices of the year. And then those are the people that I would kind of roll it out to, because for them to implement something new and revolutionary isn't that difficult for them, because they've already got systems and processes in place. This is just one more. The people that are, behind, and they've got to implement 3, 4, 5 things before they implement this, they'll never do it. So that's what I would do. I would probably run a practice of the year and give it to the top practices, because for them to implement, it's like, yeah, we could do it. We schedule 2 to 4 hours every single week to work on our business. This is just one more thing we'll add as a project, and we'll get this done. Make sense?
I love that approach, by the way. Carla, what do you think? We could create like an award show for each broker dealer, right? You could have the practice of the year, the most improved practice, right? The fastest growing practice, whatever it is, but run it through Truelytics to kind of make it so that there's no chicanery going on, right? That we know we know that it's all validated data.
I'm actually going to get a bit controversial on you and kind of play the devil's advocate and say, can't help somebody that doesn't admit or acknowledge or realize that they need help to begin with in the first place. You can try to roll these out to the advisors until you're blue in the face, but if they're not to that point where they've had that aha moment, I need to be doing something more or be doing something different, impact.
Yeah, and that's 100% true. Is that you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink type of thing. And there are definitely, I think, in every advisor population, there's a handful of folks who they've just decided, as we were kind of joking about earlier, that I'm not learning anymore. I'm not letting any extra information come in.
True, but to be fair to them, they don't know what they don't know.
You're correct.
Right? You and I know that their practice could be improved. You and I know the metrics and the analytics and the KPIs, but they don't know what that looks like. But when we, introduce something like Truelytics, when we introduce something like the practice of the year, and when they start to go through the process, then they'll realize the shortfalls that they have in their practice. Sometimes they don't realize that. So if they realize and they know what they don't know, well, then that's a different story. Some people will choose to do something and implement, and some people will, choose to say, you know what, this is too much work and I just don't want to do it. Right? So letting them know what they don't know is the critical part of the whole process, right? Because that's what practice management is all about. Not everybody knows what practice management is all about. It's a widely used term defined in so many different ways. But if they do know what they need to put into their practice, they do know they need to, work on this succession piece and this analytical piece and this KPI. Well, that's a different story. Sound fair?
It does. Grant, what's interesting to me, and I could really hear your experience as a coach coming through there, right? That it is one of those things where we don't like to think of business as emotional, right? That people there's some emotional things that are holding an advisor back or holding an executive back from making certain changes. But the reality is right? It's people. They're human beings, and they're making or not making decisions or taking action or not taking action based on, more often than not, emotional reactions to those things. So if an advisor is nervous, it really doesn't enjoy sales, and they've maybe built their business up just solely on referrals, and they're luckily enough, they built it up to a point where it's reasonably successful, but now they're struggling to grow, helping them develop a process and the confidence in that process to go out and learn how to sell is something that's, I think a coach like yourself is really going to help in that initiative.
Yeah, agreed. Because we know, one of my favorite stats comes from CEG Worldwide. They said that 84% of the wealthy engage emotionally first and logic second. 84% engage emotionally first and logic second. We're no different as advisors. We engage emotionally first in our business and logic second. So coming in with all the numbers and the data and the KPIs, that's secondary. Right? The first thing is, what are you trying to accomplish and where are you going? So I agree with you 100% on that.
I love that approach. So I have some fun questions here, right? It's always I don't know. Everybody likes the scary stories, and people also like the feel good stories, right? So I thought we'd start with a scary story first. Can each of you maybe share one of those interesting practice management emergencies that have happened? I always joke, like, usually there's not that many financial advisory or investment management emergencies if you're doing things right. But the reality is there are the occasional, like, oh my God, what is happening here? And somebody needs help fast. Do you have any of those, Grant, that come to mind where you had an emergency and you really had to come in and roll your sleeves up and help somebody in crisis?
Well, I got a great story for you. So on a Saturday afternoon, my wife comes to the office and she says, get in the car. I said, where are we going? She says, just get in the car. I'm thinking, oh, this isn't going to be good. So I get in the car and we drive up to this guy's house. And I said, what are we doing here? And she says, see that trailer? I said, yeah. I said, we're buying that and we're taking the kids camping. In other words, I was well past capacity and I had no clue. And she helped me with that because it was on a Saturday afternoon and I just kept on working and working. And so I help people with the capacity issue because I hit capacity 2 or 3 times and it's an absolute horrible place to be. And capacity hits you when you've got to be at your kid's concert for Christmas and you've got too many things to do on your desk and you haven't organized it properly. Capacity hits you in the worst time when you're, someone's ill in hospital and you've got client, demands and so forth. So managing capacity, that's a good example of the story of, it hits us and it changes our business when it does hit us. And I hope that advisors, don't get it to that level where, capacity is really going to, affect not only your business, but also your personal life and your family life. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. That's what you're trying to do. So, I guess that's the story that I would share is my own situation where I hit capacity 3 times. It's a horrible place to be. Yeah, working
and capacity comes in many different ways, right? It comes in different forms. I mean, it's the time capacity that you were describing there, and maybe the attention. The ability to add extra things to pay attention to capacity-wise, but there's also the capacity of your skill set, right? Like you mentioned that you had your top 3 things that you do when it comes to practice management for people, and capacity was number 1, and I want to say client acquisition was number 2, or the client acquisition process was number 2, and I see that all the time where advisors and firms run up against their capacity to bring on new clients. They've kind of exhausted their innate ability, their marketing reach, and now they're stuck, right? They have no idea where the next client is going to come from, and they need help there. And I'm sure that happens in a lot of other areas in their business as well. Carla, how about yourself? Have you had, I think you actually had a couple of really interesting emergency stories on the practice management side that you've worked with Truelytics clients. Care to share one?
Yeah, I have. So most of my practice management work that I do is tied to corporate planning initiatives, which are, again, centered around those business stability KPIs that we measure through Truelytics. Most of them are around when something goes terribly wrong with an owner. I'll tell you, since I'm usually the doom and gloom person within the firm, I'll touch on one that does not involve somebody getting hit by a bus for once. So I was working with a firm that had a handful of owners, and they were faced with a situation where one of those owners had gone completely rogue and was just out of control, doing things that were hurting the business. And they needed a way to get this individual out of the company. However, they had nothing written into their operating documents that would facilitate a mechanism to do that. So it was help us get this guy out of here, was the very interesting emergency situation.
And so what was kind of the high level remedy for removing somebody from the business? What is it more of a, hey, we need to write the appropriate legal documents, or do we have to do evaluation to buy this person out? What's a high level mechanism for?
It was all of the above. So because they lacked a simple thing such as puts or calls within their operating document, they had to negotiate and pay, quite frankly, out the nose to get this individual to leave. They ended up letting him take a bunch of clients with him as well. So things like a corporate planning initiative that can have a huge impact on your firm.
Well, that's kind of sets the stage a little bit for some of the things we were talking about earlier, which is, planning can, while it can seem like a little bit of pain up front, it can help you avoid a great deal of pain down the road, right? That you don't have these type of emergencies because you actually focused on having a little bit of planning of like, hey, what do we need to do to improve this business? Oh, one thing we should do is make sure there's continuity. One thing we should do is make sure that should we decide to part ways, we have what that looks like in writing, so there's no dispute of what it looks like, what the process is going to look like in the future.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Well, on the flip side, let's get happy with this, right? Kind of as we're kind of at the tail end of the podcast here. What about some, interesting practice management success stories, things that you're most proud of how you've either helped somebody turn something around or achieve goals that they didn't think were possible when you first started working with them? Grant, you have a story or two about that?
Yeah. So I was working as an advisor, and all of a sudden, my mentor at that time was Bill Backrack, and he came to me and he said, "Oh, tell me a bit about your business." "Oh, I got all these clients, I got this assets, revenue team, and so forth." And he took an evaluation of my practice, and he was blunt. He says, "For a pretty smart business guy, you're running a pretty shitty business." And I was pissed. I was not happy, but he was right. I had way too many clients that weren't, what I call ideal clients. And I was working way too many hours for the revenue that I was generating. And so I brought on an associate. I took, 200 clients, and I said, here's what $30 million of assets, 50-50, and you'll own these clients over a period of time, and let's free up capacity. So I actually went and decided to give up $50,000 of income in hopes of making more than that and working with less people. And I turned $50,000 of income into $300,000 of income. I turned 200 clients, roughly $30 million, into 11 clients, $30 million. And so really, 75% of advisors don't have a clear definition of what an ideal client is. And yet the advisors that do have a clear definition of what their ideal client is, they grow and compound their business by 17% or more annually. And so that's one of the success stories is, my practice, and I help advisors, you shrink and you actually grow, but you're looking for ideal clients. So 75% of advisors don't have a clear definition of what an ideal client is. And I think I would start there is what is your clear definition of ideal client? What I help, the listeners is write down one number. What is the ideal revenue? And maybe you get an upfront revenue, maybe you do some insurance planning, and maybe you get an ongoing revenue. But what is the ideal revenue you want to get from an ideal client? And then figure out how many ideal clients you can manage. And then figure out how you're going to deliver more value, not get more clients. You see, I was so focused on getting more and more and more clients, and I even wrote a book on it, Guerrilla Marketing for financial advisors. But you don't have to get more clients. You have to deliver more value. So the question that I have for listeners is, how are you going to deliver more value to less people? And I think that's one of the success stories is, I really work with advisors that want to go down that path and firms that want to go down that path. And what I'm not saying is don't get rid of all these other clients. I truly believe that everybody needs and deserves quality planning and advice. It just can't be you. You can't service everybody. And that's where the capacity runs into. So finding out what an ideal client wants. And the other, success story that I would share is we know that 85% of advisors don't have any formal feedback system. 85% don't have any formal feedback system, yet the ones that do earn 52% more advisors that don't. So how can we build a feedback system for some of your best clients to truly deliver more value to them? So you can ask them three simple questions. What are the three things of value that we deliver that you really appreciate? And how can we deliver more and more value? And start by doing some just one-on-one feedback with some of your best clients and truly defining who your best clients are, and then focusing on delivering more and more value. Because we all feel guilty as advisors that we're not doing enough for our best clients. We're not spending enough time, we're not communicating enough. And so that'll help you get past that guilt, spend more time with clients, because this is the weirdest analogy I use, and I always say it facetiously, but what happens when we spend more time with our best clients? What happens? We make more money. Isn't that weird? It's just a weird phenomenon. So I want you to spend more time with your best clients and best prospects and best opportunities, right? And so doing a clear definition of who they are, doing the feedback for them, and then enhancing your service that you're going to deliver to your best clients. And that's where I want to take you from an advisor from a one-dimensional world, just about, products and performance, to a two-dimensional world, planning and advice and value add. Planning and advice and value add. So I'm taking you from a one-dimensional products and performance to a two-dimensional planning, advice, and value add, and figuring out what that second dimension really is, and delivering more and more every year. Sound fair, Mike?
That's great. I love it. How about you, Carla? Any particular success stories that were really exciting for you that you've seen where it's been somewhat transformative for the advisor or the firm you're working with?
Absolutely. So my success story is actually for that same firm, the horror story that I shared. They finally got this rogue owner out, and it forced them to sit down and look at their corporate documents to put everything in place, to put employment agreements in place. They brought in some new owners. And because they did that and they took the time, they were presented with an acquisition opportunity. And that extra step that they had taken within their corporate planning helped them in that acquisition, which I think is so cool because it turned the lemons into lemonade through that whole process.
That's awesome.
Cool.
That's fantastic. So in closing here, what I think it's fun because we're at the beginning of the new year here. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, what are some big themes or practice management related themes for whether it's broker-dealers, wealth management firms, or individual advisors for the new year, for 2019? What do you see coming for the new year that people should have their eye on?
So one of the challenges that every single advisor faces at the start of the year is how are we going to find and acquire more ideal clients this year? Each and every year it becomes an issue. How are we going to find and acquire more ideal clients? And so if they have a process in place to, their marketing in place, all the things that you deal with, Mike, is what is their plan in place to acquire more ideal clients, and how many ideal clients do they really want to acquire this year? So is it 10, 15, 20 per advisor? What is the number of ideal clients that you want to generate, and what is the revenue per ideal client? So let's just use a ballpark number. If it's 10 new ideal clients and $10,000 revenue, it's going to, grow the firm by $100,000 per year. Excellent. So what amount of time do we need to time block to really do that? And so it starts off on paper at the start of the year, sounds wonderful, but how are we going to time block and to do that and to find those people? What are the events? What are the activities? What are the things that we need to do to acquire these new ideal clients? And that's where the 2 to 4 hours a week comes in, of working on your business, of how are you going to find them, what marketing that you're going to do, how are you going to acquire them, how are you going to time block to call and meet them, and then eventually acquire. And so to get 10, you might need to talk to 20 or 30. And so that's going to need some time and some time commitment. And so that's what I would start off with, for this year, is every single person wants to acquire more ideal clients. Where are you going to get them? What's that going to look like? Are they just going to fall in your lap and hopefully you get some nice referrals this year? Or do you actually have a plan in place? And that's right.
That's
and
great.
I think that's where you could add in some value, Mike, on some of the things that they could do on the marketing to accomplish that, right?
I like to think so. Yeah. So, Carla, how about yourself? I mean, I would imagine, one of the things that's top of mind for you, you made a prediction in our new predictions post that's going to be coming up that 2019, you're going to see some acceleration in M&A in the space. I would imagine, getting your valuation and your succession planning in place for that is top of your mind.
Yeah, I think 2019 could be a very tricky year, depending obviously upon what happens in the financial markets. I think, people are kind of thinking that valuations drop because of what happens. So I think where I really want to see people focused the next 12 months is really an education and awareness phase of understanding, hey, what's really driving my value? If there is this downturn or correction in the market, like everybody seems to think there is, how is that going to impact my business? And better yet, what are changes that I can make within my business that aren't tied to market performance that may help increase the valuation to set off that difference, if you will? So
That's
it's
awesome.
learning, getting educated, and understanding what goes into everything about your practice.
Yeah. So to add to that, we know that the best clients want to hear from their advisor 10 times a year. Now, I don't mean by, they want 10 touches a year. And however you deliver that touch, maybe 2 or 3 meetings, maybe some phone calls, some things. But they need, or they want, or they're asking the industry or their advisors, they're asking for up to 10 touches a year. This is even more critical with the markets the way they are, is they want those touches. They probably didn't want as many touches, when the markets were doing fine. But I think that critical touch is more important in 2019 than it ever has. And only 33% of advisors do 10 or more touches for their best clients. And so the people listening on the call, what are your 10 touches to your best clients, right? And figuring out what that looks like. It could be non-investment communication, just calling people and say, hey, how's it going, right? Just touching base. But whatever those touches are, your best clients want to hear from you up to 10 times per year. And that is building out a process to deliver up to 10 touches per year. And I think that's kind of, where you're going, Carla, is, there's going to be some changes this year and people want to know what's going on. And communication is critical at this juncture. You don't agree?
Absolutely.
Well, it's interesting. I have 1,000% agree with that, right? That's one of the things that that I evangelize a lot is that, engagement with your clients, prospects, and referral partners. It's incredibly important, but it's also never been easier, right? Using social media, email, and other communications mechanisms, it's become an easier thing to do. So there's no real reason why you shouldn't stay top of mind in interacting with those folks. And on that topic, we're kind of at the end of the podcast here, but I'd be remiss if we didn't ask and make sure that people have a mechanism to stay in touch with you, Grant. What's the best way for people to catch up with you? I assume you're on social media and other platforms. If somebody wanted to learn a little bit more about advisor practice management, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
So a couple things. One is advisorpracticemanagement.com. That's the website, so you'll learn a little bit more. Be more than happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. I write a weekly blog on LinkedIn on practice management issues. So if you just want to join or connect, or even just follow me on LinkedIn through the Practice Management Weekly blog. And the final thing is, if you got any questions, you just shoot an email, grant@ghicks.com. If you got any questions on any practice management issues. And like we said before, is more than happy to give you a copy of the ebook. This is all the data and research on practice management that I did over the last 30 years. I'm more than happy to get that copy into their hands to help them grow their practice. Perfect.
And of course, Carla, people can find you over at Truelytics. And of course, you're very active on social as well. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Grant and Carla. Of course, it's always wonderful to have you on the show. Hopefully, I think you and I will have dozens more appearances on the Valuations podcast together in the future. Hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Valuations podcast. I know you have other things you could be doing with your life, but you chose to spend some time with Grant, Carla, and me today. So thank you very much. One last ask. Obviously, please do like and subscribe to the podcast on whatever your favorite podcasting medium is, whether that's iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or TuneIn. Also, let your friends know about the podcast, right? Let your colleagues know, hey, it's a really cool podcast called the Valuations Podcast by this company called Truelytics. You should check it out. Please do spread the word. And then, obviously, if you want to see some other things covered on the show, valuations@truelytics.com, or swing to the Truelytics website, click the contact form, let us know through that, or you can always hook us up on the socials. That's always good. Next week, I've got Jamie Wise from Buzz Indexes joining me. Really good episode. I've already recorded it, so I happen to know it is a good episode, and it's going to be awesome. So you're going to want to tune into that. All right, hope you're having a great day, and we will talk to you soon. See you next week on the Valuations Podcast. All right, bye.